Welcome everyone to this class on the overview of the living wisdom of the inner planets. I'm Cayelin Castell here with Erik Roth, and also Daniel DeMario will be teaching the class, but he's not available for this video, so we're taking it upon ourselves to introduce you to this content. And what we're going to share with you is you'll learn some really cool stuff in this video, but everything that we're going to share with you is what we go in depth in the full class. So we're really excited, and it's an awesome class that this content and this information is not taught anywhere else in this way, and this view of the synodic cycles that is really something that we've adopted from how the ancient people looked at what was visible and so on. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Is there anything you want to say in opening, Erik, before we jump into the slides?
Just to say hello, and I'm happy to be here to help with doing this lesson 0 for the Living Wisdom course. We've got a lot to share, so I'm excited.
Well, let's do it.
So
Okay.
shall I go ahead and share
Yes.
this?
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
All right, so yes, the Living Wisdom of the Inner Planets course, and let's not confuse this with the Sacred Marriage and Relationship course. They both contain a lot of information about Mars and Venus, but this is an entirely different, more technical, but also experiential in its nature. So this online course will be generally focused on Mars, Venus, Moon and the lunar nodes, and as well as Mercury. Cayelin, did you want to?
Well, so yeah, so we're going to share a little bit about each of those and some of the things that we'll be covering with these synodic cycles. Synodic, of course, I think there's a definition coming up here soon, but it just basically means the relationship to the sun. So when a planet returns to its previous relationship to the sun, it doesn't mean conjunct the sun necessarily, but that it's the synodic cycle. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along.
Absolutely. So this is as we in Shamanic Astrology and Shamanic Astrology Mystery School in particular, a lot of what we do here is teach about what is really going on, why when we look at these planets outside, looking up at the night sky or even the day sky and seeing the planets and how they operate and the patterns that they weave up there, there's a direct imprint into the cosmic sphere, into our psyche, into who we are as human beings. And we also, vice versa, give back to that into the cosmos. So it really is the kind of astrology that you will not find in very many schools at all. And in fact, the schools that I've looked at in my time, I have not seen this taught, these kinds of interpretations of cycles taught in any other schools. And this goes back to ancient lineage time, 6,000 years and more, from all across the globe, looking at the various patterns of these inner planets. And so that's why we are calling this is astrology not taught in other schools. And it literally is. It's definitely an experiential course. So of course, this is an online course, so it's a version of it in person in the past many times. And we've gone out under the night sky and at stone circles and have described this and tuned into these planets and stars during those teachings.
Yes, thank you, Erik. The other thing is that we really have been informed a lot by how to work with these cycles through the stories that have been told about the story. For example, the story of Inanna is the entire description, her descent into the underworld, her ascent from the underworld, that is the description of the Venus cycle. And so we're looking at, how these people worked with these cycles to get clues about how we can do it now. And coming from that perspective of, we inform the mysteries as much as they inform us. So when we have this understanding, when we have this knowing, and as Erik was saying, we're imprinted. And then, so we get that initial imprint, it goes into our DNA when we're born. And then there's this evolutionary process that's intended to take place. And so we often focus on the outer planets and their transits and how they're creating an evolutionary journey for us. But it also is happening with these synodic cycles of Venus, Mars, Mercury, and the Moon, and their relationship to the sun and how their cycles work. So it's really very cutting edge, leading edge content at this time, though it was something that was hugely known to ancient cultures, and they worked with it a lot ceremonially and understanding, what was going on based on what was going on with these planets.
Absolutely, and it's from standing on Earth and our experience of observing and feeling into the cycles as we bear witness to the movement and patterning of these planets.
So what
here,
will you learn?
Summary.
What will you learn in this course?
Yes, what will you learn? So we will learn about the remarkable patterns of Mars, Venus, Mercury as they weave through the sky, creating profound personal transformation. A deeper understanding of the lunar cycles and why they are important. Now, we did talk in the Shamanic Timeline online course. There is a portion of that where we talk about the nodes, but we'll go into more detail about the synodic cycle, the sidereal cycle, why the nodal return and the nodal reversal come into play.
And the interweaving of the lunar cycle and the nodal cycle, because of course they're one and the same in essence, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They come from the same relationship with Earth, Sun, and the Moon.
Yeah.
We'll also learn how to reclaim the ancient knowledge of the synodic cycles, what they are and why they're important. And they are vitally important.
Yes, and how these return cycles impact our lives. And I know, Erik, you have been working with the Mars cycle profoundly with Daniel, and Tammy and I have been working with the Venus cycle, doing ceremonial work with those cycles. That really informs us in ways, it's like the understanding, I'm sure this is true for you, has been so deeply enriched and expanded. And I keep learning things about my own process and my own cycles and how it's all working together. And I've been doing this work with Daniel since the mid-90s. So it's really fun to see that there's this constant evolution, and we're going to be bringing that into this class as well.
Absolutely. So again, you're going to be gaining unique knowledge that is not available anywhere else. Anywhere else in this format. Now, there are other interpretations of synodic cycles out there, other astrologers that interpret it, but the way it's interpreted is quite unique in the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, because we tune into, for the majority of it, how the ancients looked into these cycles, but in a new context, in a way that we're experiencing here today in the modern age.
Yeah, one of the things I tend to notice too is that some of the ways that other astrologers might work with the synodic cycles is to look at this conjunctions with the sun. Now, what's interesting about that, it's easy to figure out on software when a planet is conjunct the sun, especially when Mars, Venus, or Mercury conjunct the sun. But if you're working with the sun conjunctions, then what you're missing is morning star, evening star, and other parts of the cycle. And so they're just dividing it up into two parts, and we're dividing it up into much more to deepen the understanding and like what is happening in each phase of the cycle, and how can we work with that understanding. So that's part of what we're doing that's very different than other schools that are teaching the synodic cycles in some way.
Yeah, especially on an experiential level, and you're working with the night sky, and you're wanting to start a cycle at when Mercury and the Sun are conjunct, don't see anything.
Or Venus and the Sun, or Mars and the Sun. I've seen people start the Mars cycle with Mars and the Sun conjunct. It's like you don't see anything when that's happening. So, you know, it's hard to have a kinesthetic experience with
Yes.
that. I mean, you can
Sure.
look at the sun, I suppose, and go, "Oh, Mars is there. I can't see it, but there it is."
And
Right.
many centuries ago, as an example, and throughout most of human history, they looked at the new moon as the first apparition or appearance of that crescent moon, just as it leaves the blaring glare of the sun, and
Right.
that
So it's like that little teeny sliver, and that would be the new
yes,
moon to them, not when it was with the sun. Yeah.
exactly. And so, but now the modern definition of a new moon is when it's conjunct the sun, and it's kind of in the kind of entrenched in our everyday experience about what the new moon is. But we also want to keep an open mind about what the new moon used to be and had been for most of human history, essentially.
Right. Before we had computers and could figure out when these things were happening with the sun, and go to the visual experience of it. So yeah,
Exactly.
I love
So
the
this.
patterns that you've included here.
Oh, thank you. There's this great book called Quadrivium, and Gemini Brett knows all about this book, but
Yes.
it was referred to me. It was referred to me by a student, client of the school, and it shows all the different patternings that all the planets weave with each other, and it's a wonderful resource. It goes into other kinds of patterns in the universe and cosmos, including music and patternings in life here on Earth. But this particular one, as you can see, this is what like a simplified version of what we're going to be talking about. I mean, there's three great examples of how Earth and these other planets dance with each other, and you can see Venus, the one on the left-hand side, being the most elegant of them all. It has a near perfect orbit, and it creates a five-pointed star or like a five-pointed lotus.
Yes.
And so that's one of the inspirations where the pentagram and the pentacle came from, was the perspective of Venus standing on Earth.
So what we're seeing here really is the sacred geometry of these planets and how it relates to our experience of them from the Earth. So, if we were out in space or on another planet somewhere, we might have a completely different experience. So this is definitely based on, how these planets are moving through the sky from the Earth's perspective. And so then it has significance to us because that's what we experience when we pay attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just Earth and a planet, but it's also these planets together, say Venus and Mars or Venus and Mercury. They create their own patterns. And one of the ones that we'll look at in depth during this course is Venus and Mars, and this powerful dance that they weave in the sky that there aren't too many that talk about it, and certainly not in the way that we do, but that it's inspired and inspired of stories of between the feminine and the masculine for many thousands of years. And so we continue to rewrite these stories in our modern media and entertainment, books, films, TV, it's out there.
Right.
So this is something that we will explore more in depth.
So, and we're going to be discovering the patterns that are going on here as well, and so the patterns of the inner planets and the moon then help us see how the wisdom of our emerging selves is evolving over time. So we have this opportunity to, once we understand these patterns, to understand and know when the returns are happening and know how to work with them and know how to support others in working with them if we're interested in that piece. Maybe you have family members, or maybe you have a practice where you would like to be able to use this to support others in that in your practice with these timings. So Venus allows for us to understand the emerging feminine identity and the sacred inner goddess. That's for men. And this cycle is very elegant, as Erik was saying earlier. It's every 8 years. Every 8 years, near your birthday, Venus comes back to the same place in the sky it was in relationship to the sun. It might come back, it does come back every year, but not as precisely as it does every 8 years. And we'll go very much into depth about why that is and how that works in the class.
And after Venus comes Mars, and that also weaves a pattern, not as elegant. It's the way it orbits the sun between the Earth and Jupiter. It's because of Jupiter, especially because of Jupiter's impact, it doesn't form quite a perfect circle around the sun. That's why we say every 15 to 17 years that it comes back around, and we get our return cycles. And this is to know our emerging masculine identity for men in general, and the sacred inner God and or masculine for women in general. And it's not to say that it's just these two genders. There's more, certainly more impact and more gray area there when it comes to other beyond just the men and women in general.
Right. And so, yes. And so that's some of what we kind of explore a little bit, but it's kind of new territory, actually. So
yes,
we haven't come to conclusions about that yet, but we are open, and we are looking into how is that really manifesting. So that's part of what the exploration will be, as well as looking at the patterns of Mercury. And this is really the emerging archetypal mind and how it's about evolving us, how our mind is evolving, what's the leading edge, where we're going, in how we think and how we communicate and how we creatively express our life purpose. And these Mercury returns happen every 6 to 7 years. And there's a way to figure out, which ones are the most significant, and we'll be going into that very deeply in the course.
And last, in this summary of the patterns, the lunar cycle and the 19-year lunar cycle and how it connects us from our past to our future selves. This is another profound set of instructions that comes into our lives every 19 years, and even halfway in between those 19 years as well, creates another impact in our lives. And so we'll learn what that is. In the timeline, we talk about it there, but we get to know more about the what's behind the scenes and why these patterns are the way they are.
And we'll also cover, in all of them, we'll cover how to determine the beginning and the end of each of these cycles.
Yes.
Different places along the way where different things are happening within the cycles, what it means, how to work with it, how to derive understanding from that's growing and evolving, of course.
Yeah. You'll learn how to track them for your own self, for your clients, for family, for friends. And
it can be so revealing. I just want to say that I've been doing this class on the Venus cycle and going back and looking at different phases of the Venus cycle. So illuminating. I mean, ones that aren't even my Venus return, and when Venus is in a certain phase and what was going on, like, wow, that is amazing. So we can really derive a lot of understanding, and oftentimes it comes from the insights when we go back and look at what was happening at different times when these cycles were taking place.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that you'll learn that is relatively new to astrology and to shamanic astrology, this was brought forth by Daniel in the 1990s, and Cayelin did some help in there.
Well, I'll just say in the beginning, Daniel called it the over Venus or the over Mars, and this was before we started even looking at the Mercury cycle. And I'm like, over? I am over that. That does not work for me. And so that helped him to move to Overtone. And we could act, you know, from the Venus's perspective, one of the ways we've been describing it as meta goddess, and Mars could be the meta god. I don't know about Mercury yet, but there could be a meta aspect, the meta mind or something. But the overtone, because sometimes people don't always understand what overtone means, but it's basically the overarching theme that happens for each of these cycles, and understanding is so enlightening. It's amazing to have that to work with as well.
Yeah, I always liked the overtone that's why the as you see in the background, a water droplet sending out the ripples. I always looked at, when I was first hearing about this, that the archetypal tone, the overtone, is like that drop of the ripples throughout the body of water. That the body of water is the entire cycle of a particular planet. And then that droplet sends out the ripples of whatever tone that is, to sort of, it sets the tone for the entire cycle. For Venus, 584 days. For Mars, on average, 779 days. And so this
and Mercury, on average, 120 days.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Don't want to leave out Mercury.
No, Mercury's fast. It likes to, but it still needs to be included.
Absolutely, yeah. I had my recent Mercury return, and I have to say that it was.
So something to know, and this is something we'll explore deeply too, is that the overtone can be in a completely different sign than your planet.
Yes.
So, I'll just say, for example, I've got Venus in Aries, and the overtone, or meta goddess, as I like to call her, is Scorpio. But my Mars is in Capricorn, and so is the meta god. The overtone is in Capricorn. So sometimes they'll be the same, but sometimes they're completely different. And that really brings a deeper understanding into of how, it's like sometimes we look at a planet, we look at an archetype, and we think, oh, it should be this way, or it should be that way, but it's not always expressing that way. And that may be because there's also another flavor, another energy that's being activated, and also can depend on where it is in the cycle that's adding another a dimension or understanding of why that Mercury or why that Mars or why that Venus might not express in the way you would always imagine. So helpful.
Absolutely. It's like it's adding a deeper layer to the masculine and feminine expressions in all. I mean, both in our charts and in the globe and the cosmos. So this gives us a greater understanding of what this expression is. And I appreciate your definition of the meta goddess. And I don't know if I'll say the meta god. First god part of that, but let's see, meta masculine.
Meta masculine. There you
go. Masculine or something. So that's something we're always evolving. We're always shifting and being open and looking out for different ways to define this, or to see it as new things come into us. And certainly in the case of what Cayelin, Castell, and Tammy Brunk have discovered, they're enriching the definition of what Venus is in this world.
Yeah, and I think for those who don't necessarily relate to overtone, it's good to have another term. But for those who don't necessarily relate to meta goddess, having the overtone is really good. So, there's no right or wrong way. We're just offering different perspectives and insights about how you can work with this and share about it. Meta feminine might be better than meta goddess. The overarching expression of the feminine, that could be cool. Or the meta mind, the overarching expression
mind.
mind.
I think that's neat. I like that.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about the Venus cycle, and here we are. Cayelin, you. Yeah,
Venus, the second planet from the sun, is also the planet most like the Earth. Of all the planets, it is most like the Earth. So even astronomers will say she's like the sister planet to the Earth. And she's very was very much important to many ancient cultures who worked with the Venus cycle and were aware, like the Mayans knew about this 584-day cycle, and they had tracked it for thousands of years into the future through some of their codexes and things that they were doing. So that's how important it was to them. They really wanted to know what was going on, and I'm sure that informed them in some way. And maybe don't remember fully what that is, but we're in that process of reclaiming that. And so again, that the synodic Venus return cycle happens when Venus is coming back to the same place in the sky, or it's close. It can be within a couple of days, on or near the birthday, and that happens every 8 years. And again, the Venus return lasts for the entire 19 months or 584 days. So understanding that entire cycle, working with it as a initiatory process, so helpful. It's just absolutely amazing. And when we first started doing this work, we didn't really understand that you needed to work with the entire cycle. That's been something that's evolved over time. So, and it's every 8 years, like clockwork. It doesn't. So if you are turning 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, 64, 72, 80, 88, 96, you are in a Venus return. If that's happening to you between now and the next beginning of the next Venus cycle.
Absolutely. And yeah, you talked about the Mayans. They did quite a lot with Venus. They created their own Venus calendar. They did a lot of ceremony around that, even interpreting the morning and evening star Venus is different.
Yes, they did.
Really powerful. I want to say, in a way, high magic for them.
Yes.
And they definitely had an intimate connection, just as the ancient Mesopotamians, Sumer, Akkadia, Babylonia,
yeah,
many thousands of years ago.
Yeah, and I think there were native tribes in the U.S. and probably around the world that also had an understanding of the Venus cycle, as well as the other planetary cycles as well, that they worked the magic with, as you were saying, because they had that understanding and that relationship. So that's part of why it's so cool to know about these cycles, because we can definitely work the magic too, where it's available to us as much as it was to them.
Absolutely. So here the Cayelin's graphic here that she created, and thank you for sharing it through your Venus teleclass series courses with this particular course. You can see the various phases of the 19-month Venus synodic cycle, including morning star, evening star, and the two different kinds of underworld.
Right, and how long, Venus is in the morning sky about 260 days. It varies a little bit here and there, but it's about 260 days. In the evening sky, about 260 days. It's about 60 to 90 days in the underworld, and then 8 days in the metamorphic. We call it the metamorphic underworld because it's going through a rapid transformation. And Venus is retrograde about 40 days, and it's a certain percentage of the cycle. So if you're born anywhere within that cycle, I know I'm an evening star, so that's not unusual, but sometimes people will be born when Venus is retrograde conjunct the sun, and that is unusual. That is only about 1.36% of people that are born in that phase. So knowing these things and then having that understanding of what it means can be really helpful.
That makes you a very rare person.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So here's just a graphic. It kind of give you a perspective of what the solar system looks like when you have a heliacal rise on, well, in this case, this one's November 1st of 2018. But this can be any of the heliacal rises. The other planets, of course, will be in a different position, roughly depending on where they are in their relationship there. But that just kind of shows how close Venus and Earth are at their closest point together when Venus is going through the metamorphic underworld and approaching heliacal rising.
Beautiful.
All right, so now we move to Mercury.
And our emerging mind.
Our emerging mind, or our meta mind.
Right, our meta mind. I love that. So the Mercury cycle is about 120 days. And again, sometimes shorter, we've seen ones that are like 105. We've seen some that are a little longer than 120. So the average is around 120. And again, as already mentioned, every 6 to 7 years. And it has to do with how we're rewiring our perception and how we're thinking and how we're communicating and what our creative expression is. And these initiations are, the Venus retrogrades are connected to the elements. So there'll be a year where they're all in fire. There'll be a year where they're all in water or air or earth. The sign that Venus, that Mercury was the overtone sign or meta mind sign that it was in when you were born, may add a different element. So, for example, I have Mercury in Aquarius, but I have the overtone of Capricorn. And that was just hugely insightful for me. When I saw that, I was like, oh, that sure explains a lot. That I got a little more of that practical and, how to think things through. And it's not just completely off in the ethers all the time. And, that kind of thing. There's some practicality that comes in for me that's really helpful. Otherwise, I might not ever get anything done. And of course, Mercury is the Roman name of Hermes. The Greek called him Hermes, and so Mercury has many stories that go back thousands of years. We can definitely look back to the Greeks and the Romans for stories, and there's other cultures that have stories as well that describe this archetypal energy, and so people's understanding of it. In fact, I think there's a story about how Hermes steals Apollo's cattle and has them walk backwards into a cave so the footprints look like they're going the other direction. And that is the description of a retrograde.
Oh.
So just one example of many, that
Maybe it was retrograding through the constellation of the bull.
Maybe, yeah, that was probably it. And that was why they created that story. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. So during the Mercury retrograde, then the creative forces of the mind take center stage. They shapeshift into a new archetypal expression. So it completes a cycle. And then as Mercury stations direct, a new cycle begins. And it's pretty powerful understanding of that, to know what that is and how to look that up for yourself and how to share it with other people.
Exactly. Now, one item to point out here is there are many schools of astrology that look at Mercury retrograde as something negative, and it's not. It's because of our reliance on, we're really relying on computers in today's age, and so Mercury retrograde, it's like becomes the fall guy or the fall gal for all the bad stuff that happens in our lives.
Especially technology wise, when it's retrograde. I have been known to blame Mercury for that.
Exactly. Or some other communication difficulties that you might have with
right.
with someone, a colleague, a friend, a spouse. But there's more to it. There's an underlying essence to why that could be happening, and that's something we're going to be talking about with Mercury, and because it is
there's an intention, so
yes.
It's not about messing up our lives.
Yeah. It's the intention to get us to see other possibilities, other things, or things within ourselves.
Yes.
If something's not working, then hey, why isn't it all working? Not on the surface, but go deeper.
Right. Beautiful. Well said.
Thank you. So Mercury station's direct example. I was going to use the solar system view, but this one's more apt, I think, in as an example. This is a one that will take place in April of 2018. I just this it's from a program called Stellarium, and it shows the constellation of the fish right there and how Mercury's gone direct and the sun is just rising at that point, but only about 20 degrees. So it's Mercury never gets too far from the sun, and the maximum amount of degrees is about 28 degrees. And some years you get to see it much more than other years. In fact, this
What I
past
really love about this image you created, Erik, is that you see that the distance between the sun and Mercury, it looks, that's 20 degrees, but from the horizon up to where Mercury is, a lot shorter, maybe 10 degrees.
Yep.
I don't know exactly what that is, but that's why sometimes Mercury is not so visible. Because if you have mountains or something in the way, you might not really see it.
That's part of why it earns its reputation of kind of hard to catch. It dances around a lot. One day it could be visible, and then a few days later it's gone. So that's it adds to its mysticism.
It's mystery.
Mystery. There you go.
Mystery, yeah.
So Mars. Yeah, as Cayelin mentioned, Daniel Giamario and myself, Erik Roth, do a regular Mars webinar series, and we're going to be rebooting that come this July 2018. But if you're watching this, a few years from now, we'll be doing more ongoing Mars series. But it follows Mars through its cycle, and Mars, we're going to be really going into Mars in this course. As we do in the webinar series, but it probably much more condensed and summarized.
Right, and it won't be tracking a specific cycle and all the different things that are happening in that cycle. It'll be just generally what happens in a Mars synodic cycle.
Exactly.
And the specifics of any given Mars synodic cycle.
So Mars represents a specific archetypal expression of the masculine principle, or the animus, for men and women. The animus really for women, but for men, it's the as in the shamanic astrology paradigm, it's the man, quote, who you are intended to be in this lifetime, and that's whatever archetype or sign that is the archetypal expression. So it's our new God, quote unquote, and,
or sacred masculine.
Or sacred masculine. So for women, the Mars initially intends to project externalized imagery of the masculine or the beloved, and then later the intent is mainly for women to internalize and integrate her Mars in a psychological spiritual process called the sacred marriage, and we go into that part primarily in the sacred marriage and relationship course.
We may talk about it somewhat, but we won't go into the specifics because that really is covered in that sacred marriage class that is also unique to the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School because nobody else teaches it.
That's right. That's right. A lot of them still teach Mars and Venus as the malefic and benefic, and they look at Venus as more of beauty and feminine and passive, whereas Mars is looked at as something more Aries-like, no matter what sign it's in. In fact, it could be considered be a detriment if you have Mars in Pisces, for example, because Pisces is so unlike Aries.
Yes.
So we don't look at it. We don't use detriments in this school. So
nor exaltations or that is better or worse for it to be anywhere. It's all good. It all has a purpose. It all has an intent. Some of it may be challenging, more challenging, depending on you. Not so much the fact that it's in that sign, but oftentimes it has to do with our cultural conditioning and family conditioning as how easy or hard we experience that.
Exactly. So this is, for the sacred marriage, it's where a woman develops the capacity and ability to take responsibility for her own Mars, ultimately creating wholeness. And that can be said on the flip side for men and their own
Venus
sign.
Yes. Same process, but it's for them. For men, it's Venus, and for women, it's Mars.
Of course, there's an overtone related to that too.
Yes,
That's
yes,
part
yes.
of the formula. So the signs for Mars and signs for Mars for men and women, Venus for women, do not describe how a person is initially, but rather what is intended for a person to discover and explore. So that in that sense, this is what they are becoming. So it's you know, as Daniel's quotes, it's a set of instructions from great mystery. So what we're becoming in this lifetime.
Yeah, another way we could say that is it's really what you're here to learn how to connect with in a deeper way. And when we understand what that is and we work on that, or we have an intention or are willing to go on that territory, I know that for myself, I've experienced this. I'm pretty sure you've experienced this too, Erik. And a lot of people have experienced this. It's when magic happens. It's like that sense of fulfillment, that sense of, oh, this has been what's missing, that understanding. It's so powerful.
Precisely. Yeah. Thank you. It is when magic happens. Yeah. So, oh yeah, here we go. I was going through the slides. Yeah. So just as the Venus cycle has, there's a Mars return cycle as well. It lasts a lot longer because of, well, Mars's orbit is outside the Earth's orbit. And so it takes a lot longer for it to come back to its, to the opposition point with the sun. And we do have returns every 15 to 17 years. As you can see on the graphic, they can happen beginning first around age 2, and then 15, 32, 47, and then a kind of a double cycle. One is more exact than the other at 62 and 64, and then 79 and 94. And the more exact ones, period, are 47 and 79. And I'm personally about to experience age 47 November.
Interesting. Well, and the thing about 32 and 64, just so people know, and we'll be talking about this, is that is when Venus and Mars tend to return to the same part of the sky together. 32, 64, and 96. Every 32 years, they kind of recreate. And it's not precisely exactly what it was 32 years before, but it's very, very close. And it's definitely worth paying attention to.
Oh yeah, those are really, really important times. Yeah, so when you're at the end, this is one of the things you'll take away from is some really powerful dates for yourself, in which you can meditate on. You can do personal ceremony. You can work with in a magical way. The important moments in your life and in your own evolution. There are 5 phases to the Mars cycle, similar to the life of a person and the way it's broken down, including the subtleties of evolution occurring on average every 25 to 26 months, 779 days. That is something we cover greatly in the Mars webinar series, but we will spend some time covering that here as well, obviously.
You'll leave this course understanding what that means.
Absolutely.
Right, and what those phases are. And
work in my life. Well, you take the course, you'll find out.
Right.
So here we have an example of a Mars Earth opposition, Mars Sun opposition. And you can see Mars and Earth are at their closest point together. Now this is a graphically represented. That's not how close they actually get. Okay, they're pretty far apart.
Erik, it looks like you could reach out and touch it.
Almost. You can raise your selfie stick and you'll get there.
Right, and it looks like the moon, Earth's moon, is like bumping up against Mars.
Yeah, there's this orbital accident waiting to happen with Mars.
Right.
But it shows, so whenever you see Mars begin to brighten in the night sky, you know that it's approaching retrograde, and that it could be retrograde, and in addition to that, it's approaching opposition with the sun. And what we mean by that is that Mars and the sun will be on opposite sides of the sky here on Earth. on everywhere on Earth. When on one particular day, they can have an exact opposition. But then
And that
Mars,
basically means that when the sun sets, sun sets in the west, Mars is rising in the east. And you can see, because from the Earth's perspective, the sun is on one side and Mars is on the other. That's
right.
why.
So what we've got here is a graphic of this year's opposition coming up in July. And then we move on to the other parts, which is the lunar phase and solar birthday. So this is something we briefly talked about, Cayelin.
Yes.
If you want to dive into.
Yeah, so just, not necessarily that you need to know all of this information right now, but just to know that going from a full moon to a full moon, or new moon to a new moon, 29 and a half days, for the moon to return to a same place in the sky. So say it's with a star, maybe it's the star Antares, the heart of the scorpion, 27.3 days for it to return back to that star. And that's why, we'll talk about this in the class, why the number 12, because 29 and a half divided into a year is closer to the number 12. 27.3 divided into a year is closer to the number 13. So both 12 and 13, those numbers are sacred to the moon, and that is why. Also, 18 and 0.6 years, that's sacred to the moon, because that's how long it takes for the lunar nodes to come back to a starting point. And then the lunar nodes are determining what the eclipses are, and there's usually 2 eclipse seasons every 6 months. So that understanding, and everybody, it's like, especially if eclipses are happening on a personal part of your chart, then they become far more significant to you when that's going on, and we'll talk about that, why that is and what that's about, as well as the times when the sun and the moon come back together around the birthday. And though the ages are listed here, 19, 38, 57, 76, 95. And there's also ones that happen sort of at the halfway point, as Erik mentioned earlier, where the sun and the moon come back together, not as close at the birthday, but within a day or two of the birthday. And so those are very significant times, and great times to do some kind of intentional ceremony on those particular birthdays, because you are setting the tone for a 19-year cycle. Be 19 years and we'll have that opportunity again.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and I guess that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, there wasn't a slide for the sagas, but I didn't want to overcomplicate this, but there's one part of this course which talks about the Mars and Venus relationship and how they're patterning in the night sky together by them as seen from Earth. And that's something we're actually going to be covering in depth when we get into when we talk about especially when we talk about the Mars, and having already talked about Venus, we can put those two together.
Right, and there's mythic stories that go with the different ways they come together, sometimes in the morning sky first and then the evening sky, or sometimes the evening sky first and then the morning sky, and then sometimes only in the underworld, not in the morning or evening sky. They're weaving these patterns, and there's meaning behind that. Ancient people created meaning for those things. So how cool is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so with this course, there'll be plenty of what we call handouts, documents that you'll receive, references to tables and charts, and you can
figure this out for yourself.
Loads of information you'll be able to utilize, especially well after, to some degree during the course, but especially after the course, after you've downloaded all the information into your brain and your heart. You can move forward with it. And this is a course that is one of the courses that is required to have taken if you want to get certified with the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. So to become a shamanic astrologer, or to incorporate that into your own practice.
And this is really, even if you don't want to do that, this content is so powerful for yourself. If you're only, maybe you're just mainly interested in knowing this for yourself. But if you have clients that you are working with and you can help them with this information, so helpful. And it does, and I just want to say, it can seem a little overwhelming, like there's a lot of details, and it takes time to really kind of, sometimes people get it really fast, but most people don't. It's like it takes a little bit of time. And the thing that's great about the way this course is set up is you can go back and watch the videos again and again to, you know, keep deepening that understanding for yourself. So we hope you would like to join us in this great adventure.
Yes, welcome to the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, and we hope you check out more of what we have to offer in this revolutionary approach to astrology itself.
Beautiful. Thank you. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.